The world is full of stories. Some are happy, some are sad, and some are truly terrifying. These are stories that linger in the back of your mind. They make you question what is real and what lurks just beyond our perception. Gather close, dear reader, as we delve into the chilling reality of three true scary stories. Stories that will keep you up at night. Sarah and her family were excited about their new home. They had always dreamed of living in a house with history, a place that had stories to tell. The Old Victorian house was full of character. Its vintage furniture and intricate woodwork spoke of a bygone era. It had a certain charm that drew them in. The high ceilings, the grand staircase, and the antique chandeliers all added to its allure. The first few weeks were filled with unpacking and settling in. Everything seemed normal. Then the whispers started. They were so faint at first that Sarah thought she was imagining them. At first, they were faint, just a soft murmur that could easily be dismissed, almost indistinguishable from the rustling of the wind. It was easy to brush it off as the house settling or the wind playing tricks, but slowly they grew louder, more insistent. It was as if the house was trying to communicate with them. Sarah would hear them at night. When the house was quiet and everyone else was asleep, the whispers would start. Whispers coming from the empty hallway outside her bedroom. They seemed to be calling her name, beckoning her to come closer. Her parents dismissed it as an old house settling. Sarah wasn't so sure. She felt a presence, something watching her. Then came the shadows, fleeting glimpses of movement out of the corner of her eye, shadows that seemed to move on their own, dark figures darting across the walls. They were always just out of sight, disappearing when she tried to focus on them. Sarah would wake in the night, heart pounding, feeling like she was being watched. The feeling was so intense that she could hardly breathe. The family tried to ignore the strange occurrences. They told themselves it was just their imagination, that there was a logical explanation for everything. But the fear was ever present, casting a dark cloud over their new home. It was a constant, gnawing feeling that something was terribly wrong. Finally, after months of enduring the whispers and the shadows, the family moved out. They couldn't take it anymore. The house had become a place of dread. They left behind their belongings, their dreams, and the unsettling feeling that they were not alone in that house. The Old Victorian house stood empty once more, its secrets and whispers echoing in the silence. The abandoned County General Hospital stood on a hill overlooking the town, shrouded in an eerie mist that seemed to cling to its crumbling walls, a looming reminder of a forgotten era, its once bustling corridors now silent and desolate. It was a place of whispers and legends, where the past seemed to linger in every shadow. Locals told tales of its haunted halls, stories passed down through generations. They spoke of patients who died within its walls, their souls unable to find peace, forever trapped in the decaying structure. Jake, a young and adventurous photographer, was drawn to the hospital's eerie allure, captivated by the mystery that surrounded it. He saw beauty in its decay, a story waiting to be captured through his lens, each photograph a testament to the passage of time. One cold November evening, Jake decided to explore the abandoned building, driven by a curiosity that overpowered his fear. Armed with his camera and a flashlight, he stepped inside, the door creaking ominously behind him. The air inside was heavy and still, thick with the scent of mildew and decay. The silence was broken only by the sound of Jake's own footsteps echoing through the empty corridors, each step amplifying his sense of isolation. He passed by rusted medical equipment and beds with torn mattresses, relics of a time when the hospital was alive with activity. Each room held a haunting reminder of the hospital's past, a silent witness to the suffering and loss that had occurred within its walls. As Jake ventured deeper into the building, he began to feel uneasy. The air grew colder, and an inexplicable sense of dread settled over him. The silence was broken by the faint sound of a woman crying, a mournful wail that seemed to come from the very walls themselves. He cautiously followed the sound, his heart pounding in his chest, each step taking him further into the unknown. It led him to a room at the end of the hall, a place where the shadows seemed to gather and the air was thick with an unspoken sorrow. He pushed open the door and stepped inside. The crying stopped abruptly, leaving an eerie silence in its wake. In the dim light, Jake saw her, a ghostly figure of a woman in a hospital gown, her presence both ethereal and unsettling. She stood by the window, her back to him, the pale light casting long shadows across the room. The room itself seemed to hold its breath, as if waiting for something to happen. Jake froze, his blood running cold as he realized he was not alone. The air around him seemed to thicken, pressing in on him from all sides. He raised his camera, his finger trembling on the shutter button, desperate to capture the apparition before it vanished. But before he could take the picture, the figure turned, her movement slow and deliberate. Her face was pale and gaunt, her features twisted in an expression of sorrow and pain. Her eyes were hollow pits of darkness, voids that seemed to draw in all light and hope. Jake stumbled back, dropping his camera in terror, the sound of it hitting the floor echoing through the room. He ran from the room, not daring to look back, his mind filled with the image of the ghostly woman. He sprinted through the hospital, his breath catching in his throat, the walls seeming to close in around him. He didn't stop running until he was outside, far away from the building, his heart pounding in his chest. Jake never returned to the abandoned hospital, the memory of that night forever etched in his mind. The memory of that night and the ghostly figure he encountered stayed with him, a constant reminder of the unknown, a chilling reminder of the darkness that lurks in forgotten places, waiting to be discovered by those brave enough to seek it out. The Vanishing Hitchhiker. Mark was driving home late one night, the darkness enveloping his car like a shroud. It was a long drive through a desolate stretch of highway, where the only company was the occasional flicker of distant headlights. The only sound was the hum of his engine and the occasional call of a night bird, adding to the eerie atmosphere. As he rounded a bend, he saw her, a figure emerging from the shadows, a young woman in a white dress standing by the side of the road, thumb outstretched, looking almost ethereal in the dim light. Mark wasn't usually one to pick up hitchhikers, especially not at this hour, but something about her seemed different, especially not at this hour, when the world seemed to be asleep and the night held its breath. But something about the woman's forlorn expression made him pull over, a decision he would soon question. She got in the passenger seat, her eyes downcast. She didn't introduce herself, nor did she offer any explanation. She didn't speak a word, her silence as heavy as the night itself. Mark tried to make small talk, to break the uncomfortable silence that filled the car like a tangible presence. But the woman just stared ahead, her gaze fixed on the road, as if she was looking at something only she could see. Miles passed in this unsettling silence, each one stretching longer than the last. The only sound was the wind, whistling through the open windows, a mournful tune that seemed to echo the woman's silence. As they approached a crossroads, the woman finally spoke, her voice breaking the silence like a whisper in a cathedral. Her voice was soft, barely a whisper, yet it sent chills down Mark's spine. "Be careful on this road," she said. "They say it's haunted." Before Mark could ask what she meant, the woman was gone, as if she had never been there. He slammed on the brakes, his heart pounding in his chest, his mind racing to make sense of what had just happened. He looked around, but there was no sign of her, no trace that she had ever been in the car. It was as if she had vanished into thin air, leaving behind only the memory of her presence. Shaken, Mark continued his drive home, the road ahead seeming longer and more ominous than before. He couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had settled over him, a cold dread that clung to him like a second skin. The next day, he told his neighbour about the strange encounter, hoping for some rational explanation. The neighbour's face turned pale, his eyes widening in shock and recognition. He told Mark about the legend of the Vanishing Hitchhiker, a tale that had been whispered among locals for years. A young woman who had died in a car accident on that very road, her spirit doomed to wander in search of a ride. They said her ghost roamed the highway, searching for a ride, forever reliving the night of her tragic end. Mark realized then that he hadn't just given a ride to a stranger. He had encountered something far more eerie. He had encountered something that defied explanation, a brush with the supernatural that he would never forget. Beyond the Veil. These are just 3 stories, 3 glimpses into the darkness that surrounds us. They remind us that the world is full of mysteries, things we cannot explain, things that go bump in the night. So the next time you find yourself alone in the dark, remember these tales. Listen closely to the whispers on the wind, and keep your eyes peeled for the shadows that dance at the edge of your vision. For you never know what lurks just beyond the veil of reality.